All right, it's time for another 2024 college football team season preview and a game-by-game prediction. And up today, back to the Big Ten, the Penn State Nittany Lightning. Nittany Lions. Shout out to Mike Nixon over on my Patreon page. He suggested I do this Penn State preview and prediction video. So, Mike, this one's for you, buddy. I hope you enjoy the video. I really appreciate you helping to support the channel over on the Patreon page. If you're a member on the Patreon page and you haven't been over there and left a comment about what team you want me to do, you need to do it quick. This list is getting really, really long. There's about 6 weeks left before the start of the college football season. I'm going to do my best to get all the way through the list, but it's getting close to the point where I'm going to have to cut the list off. So there's a link to the Patreon page in the description of the video. So if you're over there, if you're a member of the Patreon page, go over there. You'll see the post about the prediction videos. Just leave a comment stating the name of the team that you want me to do the prediction video for. But Mike, this one's for you, buddy. All right, the Penn State Nittany Lions for 2024. I am extremely curious and interested in looking forward to reading the comments on this video after all of you watch it. The story of Penn State over the last really decade or so since James Franklin got there has been pretty much the same. They've been a good to really good team almost every single year, finishing in the top 10 multiple times, finishing in the top 15 almost all the time, but they can't beat Ohio State or Michigan. I know they beat them on occasion, and they did win the Big Ten back in 2016. It was 8-9 seasons ago now. I think was that Franklin's second or third season. But the story has been the same, right? And it's gotten to the point where a lot of people openly talk about the possibility of James Franklin being on the hot seat and things like that. Now, I've always came to James Franklin's defense when that came up. I think it's ridiculous to have any talk about him being on the hot seat, but I do get it, especially if you're a Penn State fan. I mean, you get to the point where even if you're like, okay, maybe we're not going to beat Ohio State or Michigan or both every single year, but can we beat one of them every 3 or 4 years at least? I understand the aggravation, but I do think James Franklin's been a really good coach. But I'm curious to see what y'all think after we get through with the predictions here, because just like with every other Big Ten team we've done so far in this series of prediction videos, and there's a playlist on the channel, 2024 predictions. You can click back through whichever teams it is you're curious to know my predictions for. But every time we talk about the Big Ten, one of the things, of course, that we focus on is the new Big Ten, right? They're adding 4 teams this year: Southern Cal, Oregon, Washington, UCLA. And more importantly, really, for Penn State in particular, is that the division structure within the Big Ten is going away. There is no more divisions in the Big Ten. For a long time, we've had the Big Ten East and the Big Ten West. And again, a similar story over the last decade or so. The power of the Big Ten has been concentrated in the East. You're talking about Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State, the 3 best teams most years in the Big Ten, all in the Big Ten East. And then in the Big Ten West, it's kind of just like an amalgamation of just, halfway decent teams, with maybe one team a year being a little bit better than halfway decent. Your Iowas, your Wisconsins, whatever the case, right? But the majority of the power within the Big Ten is falling into the Big Ten East. And in the case of Ohio State and Michigan, you're talking about 2 top 5 programs right now. They win a bunch of games. Both have made the playoffs. In Michigan's case, winning a national title last year. Ohio State won a national title back in 2014. I believe it was 2014 or 15. Anyway, so, both won a national title during the playoff era. Both have won a ton of games. And then you got Penn State. And again, a good team. A couple of years really good. A good coach. Had a lot of good players. Put a lot of players in the NFL. But it just seems like they were always looking up at either Ohio State or Michigan in the Big Ten East. And because you had that division structure, Penn State was never in the Big Ten title game. I mean, they won it back in 2016, but I mean, generally speaking, they've been in that side of the division where they're just staring up at Ohio State and Michigan. And they've been kind of unable to get over that hump. And that is legitimate criticism when it comes to Ohio State. Where I kind of draw the line or kind of push back a little bit is with James Franklin's overrated. He's not any good. They need to get rid of him. He's, blah, blah. I think he's pretty good. And it's going to be interesting this season how the divisions have gone away. And you'll see when we put the schedule up. They no longer play Michigan and Ohio State. Now, they still play Ohio State this season, but they don't play Michigan. Not only that, They avoid Oregon. When you look at sort of the pecking order within the Big Ten, at least in the offseason or preseason or whatever you want to call it, the way most people are stacking up the Big Ten right now, you've got kind of Ohio State and Oregon kind of at the top, right? And then below that, you've got a couple of teams. Penn State maybe, Michigan maybe, maybe one or two others you want to push up to that second tier. But the point is, Penn State avoids all but one of those teams. They do play Ohio State, but they get Ohio State at home. They don't play Michigan. They don't play Oregon. It's going to be curious to see how they do with this version of the Big Ten schedule. And what if Penn State still doesn't make the Big Ten title game in a year where they only play one of the top four teams in the Big Ten, Ohio State? They don't play Michigan. They don't play Oregon. And there's no divisions to sort of keep them out, on the other side. Anyway, let's talk about Penn State. James Franklin is entering his 11th year as the head coach at Penn State. Of course, came from Vanderbilt, where he led them to back-to-back 9-win seasons. And I've admitted this before. That's part of my bias when it comes to James Franklin. I'm kind of an SEC guy. Georgia's my favorite team. I live in the heart of SEC country. And if I live to be 500 years old, I'll never forget James Franklin leading Vanderbilt to back-to-back 9-win seasons. So no matter what he ever does at Penn State, he's always going to at least be considered a good coach in my eyes. I'll never consider him a bad coach no matter what happens or doesn't happen with him up at Penn State. But he does only have just the one Big Ten title since taking the job up there way back in 2015 or 2016. And last year they were 10-2 in the regular season. And again, it's a rinse and repeat. I mean, they're not 10-2 every year with losses to Ohio State and Michigan, but that's sort of the argument about Penn State. That's if somebody who doesn't know anything about college football and you're trying to teach them about college football and get them up to speed, and the topic of Penn State comes up, the conversation probably goes something like this: yeah, Penn State's a pretty good team. They're in the Big Ten. But they can't get over the Ohio State-Michigan hump. They just lose to them every year. And that's not 100% accurate. They have beat Ohio State and Michigan from time to time, but generally that is a good description of what Penn State has been. But 10-2 last year, the two losses to Ohio State and Michigan, 10-3 after a Peach Bowl loss to Ole Miss. They lost that game 38-25. You can make what you will of the bowl games. I'm not here to tell you that means anything or doesn't mean anything. Everybody's got their own opinion on bowl games. We argue about that during bowl season and immediately after bowl season. I'm just telling you the teams they lost to. What you decide to think about that loss to Ole Miss is up to you. We're going to look at the offense for Penn State, what they lost, what's coming back. We're going to look at the defense for Penn State, same thing, what they lost and what's coming back, returning production, the Vegas numbers, what do they think about Penn State's chances this year? And then I'm going to put the schedule up on the screen and we're going to go through it game by game, and I'll give you a winner and a loser for every single week. Let's start here. They're replacing both coordinators. Now, typically, that's not good. And actually, I would say it's never good. You're usually replacing both your coordinators for one of two reasons. Number one, they were terrible, so you fire them and you got to try to turn something around, whether that be offense or defense. Number two, they were really, really good and they got poached by somebody else. In the case of defensive coordinator, that was the case with Manny Diaz. What he did with the Penn State defense was unbelievable in his couple of years there. We'll talk about some of the numbers in a minute. He's back to being a head coach now back in the ACC. So they got a new defensive coordinator. They also have a new offensive coordinator. Interesting, not really a stat, just an interesting fact here. The last time Penn State had to replace both their offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator heading into a season was the last time they won the Big Ten. So, of course, Penn State fans are hoping for some of that same magic again in 2024. But the last time they replaced both coordinators, they won the Big Ten the following year. We'll see if they can do it again. All right, quarterback Drew Allar, whatever. Again, I don't name these people. You can rage type till your fingers fall off about how I'm pronouncing names wrong. I don't care. I didn't name these people. Quarterback Drew Allar. A good year. I think Drew Allar is a little bit of a victim of perception. You know, Ohio State's had a perception for a while now that they've got a decent offense, good lines of scrimmage, good running backs, but they lack talent at skill positions. Quarterback been subpar, no real wide receivers of note outside, maybe one or two. They've been a lot like Notre Dame in that way. People talk about Notre Dame in the same way. At least they did for a long time under Brian Kelly. Lack the elite talent at skill positions. I think Drew Allar is a little bit kind of a victim of that perception. He had a pretty good season last year. Now, their offense was not explosive. That's been a recurring problem for Penn State and one that they're looking to fix. But if you just look at Drew Aller by the numbers, maybe you didn't watch the games. Maybe, there are valid criticisms there. But if you just look at the numbers, it was pretty good. He led Penn State to 36 points per game. That's pretty good. The problem is, in the 2 losses during the regular season against Ohio State and Michigan, and you probably watched those games, I watched both of them, it was painful. Penn State's offense was bad. They struggled to move the ball. They struggled to get first downs, never mind score points. In fact, over the course of the season, they did average 36 points per game, but in their 2 losses to Ohio State and Michigan, they averaged 13 points a game. And this isn't your granddaddy's college football. You're not going to win very many games averaging 13 points. It's just not going to happen. And, of course, they lost both those games. But Drew Aller, for the season, 25 touchdowns and only 2 interceptions. That's impressive for a first-year starter. Now, I know he was highly rated and recruited out of high school and all that. He's got a ton of talent and potential, so maybe you say, well, it's not a surprise. Any first-year starter to only throw 2 interceptions, that's pretty good. You usually see a lot of, first-year mistakes, whether it's bad reads or, fitting a ball into a window that you were able to fit it in high school. That window becomes much smaller and closes much quicker at the college level, and so you tend to see a lot of turnovers by first-year starting quarterbacks. Not the case for Drew Aller last year. A 25-2 touchdown to interception ratio, that's pretty good. Now, maybe you wish the touchdowns were closer to 30 or something like that. Okay, maybe, we'll see how he progresses this year, but 25-2 is really, really good for any quarterback, honestly, for a touchdown to interception ratio. When you talk about wide receivers, it's a position that they've struggled at least in my mind, during James Franklin's time. They've had a few, like I said, that have been really, really good, but for the most part, they've had below average wide receiver play. They addressed that this year in the portal. They went to Ohio State and brought in they went to the portal and brought in Julian Fleming, who entered the portal out of Ohio State. And I think Julian Fleming's a really good wide receiver. I'm not exactly sure what the Ohio State fans might say about Julian Fleming now that he's entered the portal and gone to a semi-rival school in Penn State. A lot of times, you're a big fan of a kid when he's on your team, but then when he transfers away, it's the whole, well, he wasn't that good and we don't need him type deal. Not sure how they feel about him. And look, he's not Jeremiah Smith or any of the other sort of top-notch, best of the best wide receivers that Ohio State has had over the last 2 or 3 years, but he was a legitimate number 2 or number 3 wide receiver at Ohio State. And you got to remember, if you're a number 2 or a number 3 at Ohio State, you're going to be a number 1 at almost anywhere else. I mean, Ohio State's wide receiver talent is just, it's laughable at this point how much wide receiver talent cycles through Ohio State in any given year. So, he's decided to enter the portal. He leaves, and Penn State picks him up. And whatever you think about Julian Fleming and what he did at Ohio State and his numbers there compared to some of their better or bigger or more prominent wide receivers, I think you still have to admit he's got the potential to be one of the best wide receivers Penn State has had in a while. And he's got a good quarterback to get him the ball in Drew Aller. Now, Drew Aller's not Jaden Daniels. He's not going to run around for 1,000 yards and sort of beat you with his legs, but he's your prototypical kind of drop back pocket passer, big, tall, strong arm, that kind of thing. And I think a weapon like Julian Fleming can thrive in this offense with a quarterback like that. At the running back position, no questions, issues, or concerns here for me. Nick Singleton, for my money, is one of the best 5 running backs in college football. I'm not talking about most yards or any one particular stat. I'm just you watch the kid play football. He's really, really good. I'd take him on my team. Chances are you'd take him on your team too, whatever team you happen to be a fan of. He's a really, really good college running back. And Allen, the RB2. And really, is there any such thing as RB2 anymore? Not really. Most teams have like a 1A and a 1B, right? Nick Singleton may be a little bit better than Allen. I'm not going to deny that. But, these teams, they rotate running backs in and out now. The days of having like one running back that averages 25 or 30 yards a carry or 25 or 30 carries per game, those days are mostly over. You have a few exceptions that pop up here and there. The guy at Oklahoma State, Ollie Gordon, he gets a lot of carries. But anyway, you know the point I'm making here. You're going to see a rotation at running back between these two players, and they're both pretty good, with Singleton, I think, being the better of the two. At tight end, potential All-American is back. Tyler Warren, 7 touchdowns last year, looks to improve on that number this year, but he's really, really good. The biggest concern I have really when I look at Penn State's offense is they've got to find a way to get more explosive plays. And honestly, I think that's a scheme, a philosophy, a playbook, an offensive coordinator situation. I think that's something that they can improve on with the players they have. And then you add Julian Fleming to the mix. Drew Aller is capable of making explosive plays. You got to put him in a position where that's able to happen. The question I have about Ohio State's offense, and this is a little strange because it's a little bit backwards from how it's been for me a lot of years in the past with Ohio State, but their offensive line, they lose 3 starters. Now, they've recruited well in that area, but anytime you're adding 3 new starters to the mix on the offensive line, it's not all about the individual talent of those 5 starting offensive linemen, right? Your offensive lineman is 5 players, but really they play as one. It's the sort of chemistry and the connection that an offensive line tends to develop over time that determines how much of their potential they're able to reach, right? And so I've got to see their offensive line play a week or 2 before I'm fully confident and comfortable with that. That would be my only question mark, or my biggest question mark or concern about Penn State offensively heading into the 2024 season. Again, not to say that I think they're going to have a bad offensive line, but any offensive line that's replacing 3 starters, to me, question mark at the end of that. Let's move over to the defensive side of the ball. Again, they're replacing the coordinator there too. They bring in Tom Allen, who I believe was the head coach at Indiana before taking this job, but that's a little irrelevant. He's the defensive coordinator at Penn State now. And, you know, I knew Penn State had a pretty good defense last year. Ohio State got a lot of the talk when it came to defense, and, of course, Michigan in the Big Ten last year. And those teams had elite, great defenses. There's no question about it. But Penn State takes a backseat to nobody defensively. They had a really good defense, too. In fact, they led the country in total yards. They allowed the fewest total yards. They allowed the fewest yards per play, and they had the most sacks of any team in the country. So it's hard to move the ball against them, and they get after the quarterback. And if you're able to do those 2 things as a defense, you're going to be pretty good. And I think their defense will be pretty good again in 2024. Again, replacing the defensive coordinator. It is a blow to lose Diaz. He's a really good defensive mind. We'll see how he does now with his second shot at being a head coach. But in terms of just ability to run a defense, Diaz was really good. We'll see what Tom Allen does with this defense. It's got a lot of talent on it, led probably by Abdul Carter. I would say I don't even think there's probably. He is the best player on that defense. He's unbelievable. I have concerns here too, though. I'm not a big fan of taking your best player and telling him to go play a different position. Now, I'm not a coach. I'm not even an X's and O's guy. Or I'm not even an analyst, really. I'm a sort of watch and react guy, okay? But I watch a lot of college football. But LSU did this last year with Harold Perkins. You know, 2 years ago, Harold Perkins played on the outside, and he was a one-man wrecking crew 2 seasons ago. Then they move him to inside linebacker this past year, and not a peep. You didn't hear nothing about him. He fell off the map, disappeared. He's not a worse player. He's in a position where he's not able to have as big of an impact, in my opinion. Again, it's just my opinion, okay? They're doing the same thing here with Abdul Carter. They're moving him from linebacker to end, so sort of the opposite of what they did with Perkins. They took Perkins from the outside and moved him inside, and he disappeared off the face of the map. Penn State's now taking Abdul Carter, and they're moving him from linebacker to end. I'm sure they have their reasons. It probably has to do with personnel and where, other players that can play certain positions or whatever. And I'm willing to watch and see how this move plays out in games once the season starts. But generally speaking, I'm not a big fan of this idea of, hey, that was our best player last year at this position. Let's move him over there. We'll see. Defensive tackles. You have 2 6-year seniors, so a ton of experience there, veterans along the defensive line, a couple of new pieces in the secondary that they acquired through the transfer portal over the last couple of years, Jalen Carter. Well, he is from Georgia, Jalen Kimber and A.J. Harris, so we'll see how they fit in with Penn State's secondary. But look, I don't have any reason to think that Penn State's defense is going to be terrible or fall off a cliff. I think they're going to be one of the best defenses in the Big Ten again. I think Ohio State's going to be really good again. I think Michigan's going to be really good again defensively. Oregon's got a really good defense. Iowa, of course, known for good defense. I think Penn State's going to be in the mix with those teams for the best defense in the Big Ten. But those are a few of the questions that I have heading into the season in terms of the offense and the defense. Returning production. How much of last year's production for Penn State is returning for 2024? Well, they're 23rd in the country in terms of returning production. So that's pretty good. They return 74% of their returning of their offense. 74% of their offensive production returns. Now, Drew Aller's a lot of that, right? In terms of offensive production, when your quarterback returns, that's a big boost towards returning production on offense. When your quarterback leaves, it's a big drawback to that. So 74% of their offensive production returns, headlined by Nick Singleton at running back and Drew Aller at quarterback. Defense, they got some more pieces to replace there. They only return 66% of their defensive production. And on top of that, they lose the defensive coordinator. So they got some work to do defensively in terms of replacing some pieces and some parts over there. We'll see how it all comes together. All right, let's put Penn State's schedule up on the screen. We're going to go through it game by game, and I'm going to give you a winner and a loser for every single week. All right, when I sit down to do these schedule predictions, the first thing I do is look at the schedule. And I come up with sort of a range of possibilities. I then go through all this information I just read off to you or just went over with you. I look up, there's different articles and sites and companies and things that like that I look at previewing teams and go through all that. Then I go back to the schedule and I finalize it. And I stared at this Penn State schedule for a long time. And I've already pointed out some of the things that jump out to me about it. They don't play Michigan. They do play Ohio State, but they get them at home. They don't play Oregon. Again, when you talk about what most people consider to be the four best teams in the Big Ten entering the season in whatever order, you're talking Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State. And then you got a group below that maybe includes teams like Nebraska, Iowa, possibly Southern Cal, whatever, but they're a tier below, right? The first four teams are kind of considered. These are your sort of players in the Big Ten this year in terms of potentially making a playoff. Well, the only one that Penn State plays, they can't play themselves, obviously. The only other one they play is Ohio State, and they get them at home. So it's a favorable schedule in terms of they only play one of the other top three teams. So that's good. Non-con schedule, Bowling Green, Kent State, and then that first one on the road at West Virginia. Now, this will be a difficult game. That's a tough place to play. West Virginia's got a great home environment, a great crowd first week of the season. Kind of a rivalry game a little bit. I know the West Virginia-Pitt game, of course, is the huge rivalry, but these are border states. It's a game both teams are going to want to win. That could be tricky. I like that if I'm a Penn State fan, I like that I have a returning quarterback here, and that I'm not in a situation where my team's quarterback is making their first ever start in week one of a season on the road at West Virginia. You got to remember, West Virginia massively overachieved last season based off of their preseason expectations. They were picked to finish dead last in the Big 12 and I think win 3 or 4 games, and they ended up winning 8. So they did a really good job last year. We'll see if they can keep it going this year, but that could be a tricky non-con game. The other two are very manageable with Bowling Green and Kent State. In terms of the bye weeks, I think they're spread out pretty good, except for the fact that bye week comes a little early in the season for me. I would like to have that first bye week maybe a couple of weeks later into the season, but they get it in week 3. You see the second bye week there. I actually think the second bye week comes in a perfect spot. You've got back-to-back road games at Southern Cal and at Wisconsin. Those 2 games would be infinitely more difficult were it not for the fact that they're separated by a bye week. All road games are tough. Back-to-back road games are really tough. So I think that's a great spot to have that second bye week. When you talk about difficult road games outside of that, we mentioned West Virginia, at Southern Cal, at Wisconsin. Those are some tough places to play. Maybe not so much Southern Cal. Their crowd is a little subdued unless they're 100-0 and Will Ferrell's on the sideline or Snoop Dogg or something, but nobody goes to those games out there unless Southern Cal's 100-0 and winning World Cups. So maybe not so much, but it's an unfamiliar environment for Penn State with Southern Cal being new to the Big Ten. Obviously at West Virginia, we talked about that being a tough place to play. And Wisconsin's probably one of the top 3 or 4 toughest places to play in all of the Big Ten. With the jump around and everything that they do there. Crazy crowd. The back half of the schedule with the road games at Purdue and at Minnesota. Again, not ideal to have back-to-back road games, but Purdue and Minnesota, these are 2 teams here where Penn State holds a massive talent advantage. And so you would think they would be able to handle those. But those are what jumps out to me about the schedule when I look at it. Now, let's go through it, and I'm going to give you a winner and a loser for every single week. And I want you to keep in mind what we normally say about Penn State. Yeah, they're good, but they can't beat Michigan and Ohio State. We go 10-2 every year. They can't beat Michigan and Ohio State. Let's keep that in mind as we go through the schedule. Week 1 on the road at West Virginia. I'm not buying West Virginia. I think what happened to West Virginia last year was the worst possible scenario. I'm not a believer in Neil Brown. I don't think he's a good coach. I don't think he's a good recruiter. I don't think he's the long-term solution or answer at West Virginia. And in my opinion, all last year did was prolong the inevitable. West Virginia was set to fire Neil Brown at the end of last season, and he comes out and wins 8 or 9 games, doubled their win total expectation from the preseason, and it put West Virginia in a spot where they couldn't fire him. Now, maybe I'm wrong, and Neil Brown follows that up with another really good year. It is possible. It's possible West Virginia has a really good year and still loses this game, though. Penn State is really good. I think Penn State goes on the road and beats West Virginia in week 1 in what I think will be a good game. Back home, Bowling Green, that'll be an easy win. First bye week, come out of that, you host Kent State. Again, an easy win there. They're 3-0 heading into their Big Ten conference schedule. Illinois, a decent team 2 years ago under Brett Bielema, the head coach there, had one of the best defenses in the country, honestly, a couple of years ago. Illinois did a top 10, top 15 defense. It fell off the face of the earth last year. They were a bad team. They were terrible. The defense was nothing close to what it was the year before. They're not deep or depth is a big issue there. Injuries just can totally derail them. Penn State will get a win at home against Illinois. And then you play a newcomer into the Big Ten, but you get them at home, UCLA. UCLA, Chip Kelly left them high and dry in the middle of the night, in the middle of January, too late to go out and hire a new coach. They had to promote from within. They then lost their quarterback of the future, Dante Moore, who decided to enter the portal. He wound up at Oregon. Just a bad offseason for UCLA, and really it wasn't their fault. They got put in a tough situation by Chip Kelly making the decision to leave as late as he did. Penn State will get a win at home against UCLA. Undefeated, 5-0, heading into a showdown on the West Coast at Southern Cal. Their first real road trip of the season. It's just a short bus ride to West Virginia, really. I'm exaggerating, but a long way to go here to play this one on the road at Southern Cal. I'm not picking Southern Cal here. I can't do it. I've already done the Southern Cal version of this video, and I talked a lot about this game in that video if you want to go back and check it out. But I don't doubt their offense. I know they lose Caleb Williams and a couple of wide receivers and a running back and all that. I get it. But I don't doubt the Lincoln Riley offense, okay? I've seen Lincoln Riley put an offense on the field 7 or 8 years, whatever it's been now, and I've seen him have one of the best offenses in college football all 7 or 8 years. I don't care who the quarterback is. I don't care who the wide receivers are. Lincoln Riley has a knack of finding talented future NFL offensive weapons and putting them on the field and having a successful offense. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt in that. I'm also going to rely on what I've seen the last 7, 8, 9 years when it comes to his defense, too. I know he's got a new coordinator. I know he brought new coaches in. I know he's doing new strength and conditioning and new nutrition and an emphasis on strength and weightlifting and new philosophies and new players through the portal. I've heard all this before from Lincoln Riley. Now, does it mean that it's impossible that he ever figures it out and eventually puts a good defense on the field? No, that's not impossible. It could happen. Maybe it's this year. But you can't predict that. You just look like a fool over and over and over again. So I think their offense will be good. I think their defense will be bad. And I have a hard time believing, as much faith as I have in the Lincoln Riley offense, that it's going to be as good as it was the last 2 years with Caleb Williams. We'll see. I do like that quarterback. And look, he put on a show in the bowl game. He had 6 touchdowns and 400 and something yards in the bowl game. But again, is that really a surprise? I mean, Lincoln Riley is the only head coach in history to coach 3 Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks, and he's done it in his first 7, 8 years as a coach. I mean, so I don't doubt the offense, but Penn State is just a better team. Defense travels, and Penn State's got a hell of a defense. And if anybody can contain the Southern Cal offense, it's a team like Penn State. Look at who Lincoln Riley has struggled with in his first couple of years at Southern Cal. Utah. He's 0-3 against Utah. Who do you think has a more talented roster? Southern Cal or Utah? It's Southern Cal. But Utah is a tough, physical team, especially on the line of scrimmage and in the trenches. And Lincoln Riley teams just can't handle that. And that's what Penn State is. And I think Penn State gets the win on the road at Southern Cal and remains undefeated. They didn't have their second bye week. And again, this bye week comes at a critical time because Southern Cal and Wisconsin might not be playoff teams, but these are two teams that are talented with good coaches. You know, Luke Fickell's at Wisconsin now. These are two talented teams with two good coaches that are both capable. Both of these teams, Southern Cal and Wisconsin, although I don't think either one will make the playoffs, both are capable of pulling massive upsets in any given week because of the coaching and the talent. Getting a bye week between these two, considering both these games are on the road, I think might be the best part about this schedule for Penn State outside of the fact that they don't have to play Michigan or Oregon. If these two games were back-to-back, Southern Cal and Wisconsin, there's no way I would pick Penn State to win them both. Because they're separated by a bye week, I do think they win them both. I think Penn State goes on the road, and I think this is the point in the season where people will start taking Penn State seriously after this Wisconsin win for a couple of reasons. Number one, they're going to be 6-7-0, whatever it is. They're likely to be ranked in the top 10 at this point with wins against West Virginia, Southern Cal, and Wisconsin. Southern Cal and Wisconsin being on the road. And the following week is the Ohio State game. Ohio State will likely be undefeated or sitting on one loss when that game is played. So this is going to be a huge marquee game, not just in the Big Ten, but in the world of college football. Big Ten title game, consequences down the road, potential impact on the playoffs. It's going to be a huge game. So I think they beat Wisconsin. They come out of that. They host Ohio State. They get them at home. They've got a returning quarterback. Ohio State's got a new offensive coordinator with Chip Kelly. They've got a new quarterback with Will Howard from Kansas State. But they still have all those wide receivers, and they still have what I think is going to be the best defense in the Big Ten. And look, I'm basically I'm giving Penn State the treatment that they've done. They're going to lose to Ohio State. Okay, I've got them beating everyone else. Southern Cal's got a bad defense. Why? Bad defense every year. Penn State's losing to Ohio State. Why? Lose to them every year. It seems set up for Penn State to get a big win. This seems like the year that they could do it. And look, I love picking kind of out-of-the-box wins and losses. Look, nothing would make me happier than to come on here and say, Ohio State's going to lose to Penn State, to troll the Ohio State fans. I can't do it. Ohio State's the most talented roster in the country. Is it possible that Will Howard shows up there and falls on his face and Ohio State disappoints? I guess that's possible. But short of that happening, Ohio State is pretty close to unbeatable by most teams, including Penn State. I think Ohio State gets the win on the road. It's Penn State's first loss. And only loss. They're going to go on to beat Washington at home, complete rebuild at Washington from the coaching staff down. They lost 21 of their 22 starters from last year's playoff team. The coaching staff is now in Tuscaloosa. They're in a brand new conference. They got some work to do in Washington. Penn State will beat them. Back-to-back road games at Purdue and Minnesota. Once every 4 or 5 years, you wake up and one of these teams has won 9 games or something. Won't be this year. Penn State beats them both on the road, Purdue and Minnesota. And then Maryland back at home. Each of the last 2 years, I was kind of high on Maryland. By high, I mean higher than the average person. I thought Maryland was good enough the last 2 years to beat one of the big three in the Big Ten East, Penn State, Ohio State, or Michigan. They came close a couple of times, but they didn't do it. Now their quarterback is gone. I'm off the Maryland train. I still like the coaching staff, but I don't think they're going to be as good even as they were last year. I think Penn State finishes up the regular season with a win at home against Maryland, and they're 11-1. And this is going to make for an interesting Big Ten championship scenario. I haven't done all the Big Ten teams yet. I'm not an expert on what all the different tiebreakers might be, but I think there is a very good chance that Oregon, Ohio State, and Penn State all finish 11-1. In my opinion, Penn State will have a loss to Ohio State. Ohio State will have a loss to Oregon. Oregon, if they lose, would have a loss to some irrelevant team that doesn't factor into this equation. I would assume in that scenario, if that's the way it plays out, that because Penn State lost to Ohio State and Ohio State lost to Oregon, that it would be Oregon, Ohio State that meet in the Big Ten championship game, and Penn State becomes the odd man out, which is not necessarily a bad thing. You're getting into the playoffs at 11-1, whether you play in the Big Ten title game or not. In fact, you might be the 5 seed. And you can make an argument that the 5 seed is the best seed to have, better even than 1 through 4. So we'll see. Now, I think it's possible Penn State could get into the playoffs even at 10-2. A little less likely than 11-1. 11-1 is a shoe-in, a lock, a guarantee to get into the playoffs at 11-1. And look, they could go 12-0, but anybody could go 12-0. I don't see it happening for Penn State. I think they lose at home to Ohio State. Put me down for Penn State 11-1 in 2024 with a loss at home to Ohio State. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're new. Hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed the video, and be sure and let me know down below in the comments section how stupid I am. Have a good morning.